Hello everyone. In this video, I want to finish our OOP Fun, our Object-Oriented Programming in Swift project. Now there are three types of objects in Swift. There are classes, which we covered in our first OOP Fun video. There are structs, which we covered in our second OOP Fun video. And there are enums, which we are going to cover in this final video of the three-part series on Intro to OOP in Swift. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a new file in OOP Fun. So I'm going to go File, New File. This is going to be a Swift file. And I'm going to call this file Genre. And I'm going to take some notes here in genre.swift about what is an enum. We're going to define an enum for a book genre. And then we're going to add another property to our book struct, as you can probably guess, of type genre. Then we're going to head over to main.swift, and we're going to see how Swift has a switch structure, which really goes hand in hand with enums. So this video is going to introduce enumerated types and switch statements in Swift. All right, so let's start with some notes about what is an enum. Well, an enum is short for enumeration, and it is a named set of options for a value. So if you ever have a variable or a property that can really only take on one value out of a discrete set or a fixed size number of different values, then an enum is a great option for the type of that variable or property. So we've got a book struct that we've been working with, which represents a very simple book object. It has an ISBN, a title, an author, and num pages. It has a computed property, which is a string description of the book. It's simply the title and author. And it also has a price. So if we were to add, say, another property to our book struct of type genre, then this genre would probably represent the genre of a book. Like, is it a fantasy book? Is it a fiction book? Is it a biography? Etc. You can probably think of lots of different genres that books might be. All right, so let's try defining our first enum, and then we're going to head over to book and add that genre property. All right, so we use the keyword enum, just like we use the keyword class and struct, and then the name of our enum type, which is going to be genre. And then inside of our curly brackets that's grouping our code that belongs to our genre enum, we put one or more cases. And the cases represents those different options for a variable of this type to be. So for example, we could have a case for nonfiction, we could have a case for fantasy, we could have a case for biography, etc. Okay, this is not a comprehensive list of all possible book genres, but just a few here to get us started with this demo. So if I have a variable or property that is of type genre, then it can only either take on the value nonfiction, fantasy, or biography. Now, I want to emphasize that this is the most basic implementation of an enum. I could make this a little bit more complicated if I wanted to, and say I want to assign some values to each one of these genre cases. I could assign, say, integer values to nonfiction, fantasy, and biography if I wanted to. Like, for example, I could say that genre stores int raw values for each one of the cases. So I could say nonfiction stores the value 0 or is associated with the value 0. If I don't explicitly say, okay, fantasy is associated with 1 or 2, then it's assumed that they're going to auto increment by 1. So if I start at 0 for nonfiction, fantasy will have the value of 1, biography will have the value of 2, etc. I could also say that my genre cases store string values. So I could associate a string value with each one of my cases. So like maybe nonfiction, I want to have the acronym NF, maybe fantasy F, and maybe biography, perhaps B. And if I ever need to access the value associated with one of the cases of the genre object or of a genre object, I could do dot raw value and access these values here. Okay, I'm going to leave this as is just so that I can show you accessing the raw values. But just know that you don't have to have any values associated with your cases, okay? This is totally optional, and I'm just kind of showing you a little more advanced use of an enum. All right, so now that we've got this genre type defined, a task for you is to pause the video and add a genre property to our book struct. And then make sure you do what you need to do in order to compile your code. All right, I hope you tried that. Let's head over to book and let's add another property. So this is going to be a var. I'll call it genre, and it is of type genre. And I'm going to initialize this to, let's say, nonfiction. So I could just type dot nonfiction, and that would initialize my genre to nonfiction. I could also fully qualify this name and put genre dot nonfiction in front if I wanted to. All right, so I go ahead and build my code, and build succeeded. Now I'm going to head over to main.swift, and let's say I want to check out book 3's genre. I could do print book3.genre. And note that when I initialized book 3, I didn't pass in any specific value for my genre. So this is just going to be the default one of nonfiction that I declared when I initialized the variable. So I see nonfiction. Okay, let's say now I want to pass in a different value. Perhaps I want to pass in biography. Actually, let's just do fantasy. That'd be more appropriate for Harry Potter book. And now I run this, and I'm going to see fantasy. If I want, I could change this here. Book3.genre is assigned, say, biography, and I'll see biography. Now let me show you how you can get that raw value associated with the current case of our genre property. So I have book3.genre. This is referring to my genre object. And if I do dot, I'm going to see in Xcode all of the available members of that object. And so I can see right here that I have raw value, which is of type string. And I can print out that raw value, which is going to be F for fantasy. So if I go back to my genre and I change this to maybe like fantasy in all caps, then I'll be able to see that raw value fantasy in all caps. All right, back over in main now. What I want to do is show you how the switch structure really goes hand in hand with enumerated types. All right, so let me take some notes on what a switch statement is. So a switch statement is like an if, else if, else structure, where instead of Boolean conditions, we have matches to a switching variable or a switching statement. So switch statements have one or more cases, and all of the cases must be exhaustive, okay? That means you have to have a case statement for all possible values of your switching statement. So let me show you what this looks like and what a switching statement is. So I have the keyword switch. I'm going to do book3.genre. So this is my switching statement right here. I'm going to switch on all possible values of book3.genre. And of course, I haven't done that yet. I have no case statements, and Swift is already complaining, saying the switch must be exhaustive. Okay, that makes sense, right? So that means I have to have a case statement or some coverage, perhaps with a default statement, for all possible values of the genre type. Okay, so my first case I'm I'll do, say, .fantasy. And now kind of indented from my case for fantasy, I can put some executable statements that I want to execute when book 3's genre is fantasy. So I'm just going to simply say with the print statement, this is a fantasy book. Now, something that's different from other programming languages like C++ or Java that you might have worked with is we don't put a break statement here. All cases have break statements, which is kind of cool. In fact, since all cases have break statements, it's the opposite. You have to put a fall through keyword here if you want your cases to fall through, meaning go to the next case without breaking. So I'm not going to do that just yet here. But I want to be very explicit that there is an implicit break here and use the fall through keyword to fall through or continue to the next case. All right, so let's do another case here. Let's do nonfiction. And I'll just print, this is a nonfiction book. Okay, I could have another case here for my last one, which is biography. But instead, I'm going to show you the use of the default case. So if you don't have any matches to your previous cases, then the default case will execute. So for us, since there's only a third option for what possibly could be the value of our genre object, then default for us is going to be a biography book. All right, so let me run this. And book 3's genre is fantasy. So I'm seeing this is a fantasy book. Note that there is an implicit break right here, which is why we didn't end up seeing this is a nonfiction book and this is a biography book. But let me show you that if I put fall through here, this is going to behave kind of like what you might know as the default behavior from a Java or C++ switch statement. So there it is. This is a fantasy book, and then we fall through to the next case. It says this is a nonfiction book. I don't have a fall through for this case. There's an implicit break, and we exit out of the switch structure. I'm going to comment that back out. And I just want to finish taking some notes about switch statements. So just to be very, very clear, all cases have an implicit break in them. Next, I want to note that say you're switching on an integer value, you can actually use ranges in your case statements. So you've probably seen something like 0 ... say less than 10 or 5 ... 10. For example, this is 0 inclusive, 10 exclusive. This is 5 inclusive, 10 inclusive. So these are ranges and you can use them in your case labels. So let me just do a really quick example. Let's say I have a variable x and perhaps it stores 100. Then I could switch on the value of x and I could have a case for say 0 up to, but not including 100, and then print less than 100. I could have a case for say 100 all the way up to, but not including 200, and then say something like print 100 to less than 200, something like this, and then maybe a default statement for values that are 200 or greater. So let me run this and you'll see that we're going to get the 100 to less than 200 because our value 100 doesn't match this range, but it does fall in this range. So switch statements in Swift are pretty powerful. You'll see them a lot, like I said earlier, with enums because enums have cases and switch statements also have cases. That's it for now with our introduction to enums and switches. Thanks for watching.